Hi everyone, welcome to Difference Frames the World, a channel to see the world differently. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification so you will not miss our videos uploaded every week. Today, we delve into the intriguing relationship between China and Russia, and why China must maintain a neutral stance in the ongoing Ukraine conflict. Russian President Putin is visiting China, the first stop after he became the Russian national leader for the fifth time. He has been ruling Russia for almost 25 years, and may lead Russia for another 10 years. He became Russia's acting president on the night of December 31, 1999, following Boris Yeltsin's sudden resignation. In March 2000, Putin was elected as the third Russian president. Initially, he tried to build and maintain a close relationship with the West, led by the US, and he even wanted to become a NATO member state. He was naive, but the West was not. As mentioned in previous videos, Russia is NATO's target, not a partner, let alone a member state. NATO's first eastward expansion after the collapse of the former Soviet Union was in 1999, when it admitted Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary, three allies of the former Soviet Union, as its new member states. Notably, in 1990, the US, France, Britain, and Germany wanted Gorbachev to withdraw the Soviet troops from East Germany, and the latter agreed. At that time, US President George Bush promised Gorbachev that NATO would never expand eastward. The former Soviet Union's last leader, Gorbachev, contributed the most to NATO's east expansion. If he had refused to withdraw the Soviet troops from East Germany, some former Warsaw Pact members would not become NATO members so quickly. George Bush issued Gorbachev a void check, so Moscow removed its troops from Germany by 1994. 10 years later, his son, George Bush Jr., became Putin's best friend, making the Russian president believe his country could become one of the Western countries. However, even the least intelligent US president could fool Putin around. In 2004, NATO started its second eastward expansion, admitting 7 new members, including 3 Baltic nations, Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia, which had been forced to join the former Soviet Union in 1940. It was NATO's largest expansion in history, but it was not the end of the story. From 2009 to 2024, 6 other countries, Albania, Croatia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Finland, and Sweden, became NATO members. The ongoing Ukraine conflict is also a result of NATO's attempt to admit Ukraine as a member state. In 2004, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine predetermined the country's destiny as a Western pawn. 10 years later, the Euromaidan Revolution ended the rule of pro-Russia politicians and unfolded the tragedy of Ukraine. Finally, Ukraine chose the West and even mended its constitution, setting a new goal of NATO and European Union memberships. Ukraine is vital to Moscow's safety, so Putin could not allow it to become a NATO member state. Otherwise, NATO will move its military assets to Ukraine, and flying a missile from Ukraine to Moscow will take only several minutes. Russia's war with Ukraine could have been avoided if Kiev had decided to give up its goal of NATO membership and remain neutral. Although Ukraine is the second biggest European country after Russia, bigger than France and Germany, it is not wise for it to confront Russia, which is 20 times larger. We must say that Putin had been very tolerant and waited for nearly 10 years to attack Ukraine, after taking over Crimea in 2014. Historically, Russians were not so patient. Some argue that Putin would not have started the special military operation if he had known he could not end the conflict in weeks or months, but we hardly think so. Losing Ukraine to NATO is the last thing Putin can tolerate. Georgia, Serbia, and even Belarus will follow if Ukraine becomes a NATO member state. NATO has 30 European member states in addition to the US and Canada. If it successfully admits Ukraine, Serbia and Belarus, which is least likely, Russia will have thousands of miles of border exposed to NATO threats. Russia and Ukraine have a border close to 2,300 kilometers, so it is not easy for Moscow to defend itself from NATO attacks in Ukraine. Although NATO claims to be a defensive alliance, it has been involved in almost all major wars after the Second World War. Moreover, many NATO members have bad relations with Russia, and as a result, no one can rule out the possibility of a war between Moscow and NATO member states. The Russians cannot afford to lose the war with Ukrainians. If defeated, Russia might collapse and be divided into several parts. It is the most important reason why Putin frequently visits China to seek help. However, China will not openly support Russia against Ukraine, and must remain neutral. Beijing has always upheld a foreign policy of not interfering with other countries' internal affairs. Since founding the People's Republic of China in 1949, it has firmly promoted peaceful coexistence, mutual respect, equality and mutual benefit among countries rather than seeking private interests by interfering with or supporting certain countries. It never takes sides when dealing with an international crisis. Russia is China's strategic partner, and Beijing understands that it will face more challenges from the West if Moscow fails in Ukraine. Still, it cannot openly support Russia. China respects Ukraine's sovereignty and does not recognize Crimea as part of Russia, and neither does it acknowledge the eastern Ukrainian states, which Russia annexed recently, breaking away from Kiev. Unlike Western nations, China understands Russia's concerns and does not officially condemn Russia's special military action against Ukraine. China will be the next target of NATO after Russia, and the latter has been expanding its influence in Asia, particularly Japan and South Korea. Beijing needs Russia to deter NATO within Europe, so it does not have enough resources to deal with China in Asia. China's core strategic interests lie in the Asia-Pacific region, specifically Taiwan and the South China Sea. Washington hopes to divert China's attention to the Russia-Ukraine conflict so it can face less pressure from the Chinese military. Conversely, China wants the US to pay more attention to other areas, like the Middle East and Europe, than the West Pacific. As a result, Beijing does not wish Russia to fail in the conflict with NATO, and is willing to provide necessary support to help Moscow. In the past 2 years since the Ukraine conflict, China and Russia have strengthened their cooperation in economic fields. In the first 4 months of 2024, the trade volume between China and Russia exceeded $76 billion, an annual increase of 4.7%. More importantly, the proportion of Russian-Chinese trade settled in local currency has increased to 92%, meaning both nations have abandoned the US dollar as the intermediary currency. Russia is not satisfied with its current cooperation with China, which is limited to only economic fields. It needs more help from China. It is why Putin has visited China twice within 6 months. Despite the diplomatic statements publicized by both governments, it is not difficult for the audience to find out that Russia offers its core technology in the nuclear field to China in exchange for more substantial support from Beijing. Moreover, Russia is gradually opening the Far East area to the Chinese for further development. China does not, or it will never, explicitly announce what support it will provide to Moscow. As the West suspects, Putin needs China's military support, but Beijing will not openly fulfill his request. In the early 1950s, China helped North Korea defend its land, but it never declared war with either the US or the other 15 UN member states in the Korean War. Even if the Ukraine conflict evolves into an all-out war between Russia and NATO, China will refrain from providing direct military support to Russia. If it has to, it will find an agent to do the work, just like the former Soviet Union asked China to help North Korea, instead of sending the Soviets to combat Americans, even though the Korean War was a regional war between the Western nations and the Socialist bloc. North Korea or Iran will play an important part in the game, but neither Moscow nor Beijing will admit it, just as everybody knows 1 + 1 = 2, but no mathematician has ever proved it. DFTW only represents itself, with no official background. Please disregard our silly guesses if you are a politician seeking professional geopolitical advice.